Okay. Hi, we are on week 3 of our behavioral therapy training with the wonderful Dr. Armendarez. Uh-oh, I'm muted. Here I go.
I muted you on accident.
Oh, that's okay. Let's do it again. No worries. As we mentioned, this is the 3rd week of a 4-part series around behavioral therapy, behavioral training. That's really what it is. And the reason we put this together is that the month of October is Mental Illness Awareness Month. We are very aware of the impact of mental illness, and we want to make sure that clinicians all over the US and outside of the US have the tools that they need to work with students. And we know that you guys are competent and wonderful at what you do. And the desire for these types of trainings is that you have more tools, right? We just want to make sure that you have more tools, that when you enter into the classroom and you're working with all types of different students, that you feel that you have the tools to help fill the gaps and help students reach their full potential. And you guys will know that here at Therapy Travelers, our mission is that, right? It's to retain, it's to empower clinicians so that they can reach their full potential. And this is part of doing that. And our clinicians have such a personal touch in with the lives of our students, and our students impact their administration, their impact their families at home. And this is just a small part of what we do. And Dr. Armendarez has been incredible in teaching this. And again, as I mentioned in the first 2 weeks, all of these PowerPoints and even this recording is made available. So if you do want to receive the PowerPoint that Dr. Armendarez will take us through, you'll want to send me an email. I will put my email into the chat box. And at any time, send me an email and say, Kim, can you please add me to the Google Doc, which is where you can actually get the PowerPoint itself. And then this recording will be available on our website under remote resources. You click on webinar and it will be there at the top, and it will be up there end of day tomorrow. So, whew, and Dr. Armendarez did say for all participants on the line, and go into the chat box and type in your discipline. Share with us what your job is, because he wants to know who is on this recording or who is participating in this event. So with that being said, Dr. Armendarez, take it away.
All right, thank you for that introduction and a lot of good information. I'm really happy to be here. This is, like I said, becoming part of my routine, my weekly routine. And it's awesome to meet other professionals across the nation and get a chance to share some of my training across the 10 years that I've been doing this with kids. So today, something that I continue to work on quite frequently is something called data collection practices and behavior interventions for individuals and groups. There is no easy way to talk about this. Well, there is. We need to talk about it. But I'm saying we have to get a good handle on it, we have to do quite a bit of practice with it. And that's something that you're going to continue to do. It's better to have the data there and to be able to look at it and analyze it. That's so important. So keep practicing with it. And then with some of these interventions, we have to keep practicing it and working as a team. So the reason why this is so important and near and dear to my heart as well, being that it's Mental Health Awareness Month, I typically work with a lot of kids from low-income backgrounds, a lot of kids who've experienced trauma. And in a community sample, more than 2/3 of children report experience a traumatic event by age 16. And what we know about the trauma literature is that many kids who've experienced trauma, a lot of times this unfolds as externalizing behaviors, so that aggression, the tantrums, a lot of destruction, and then also some internalizing behaviors where children turn in toward themselves with anxiety and depression. So this work is so important. Keep it up out there. As we go along, I want to make sure that everyone's putting in comments into the chat. Feel free to do that. What are your questions? Keep them going in there so we can talk about them. So today we're going to do a brief review of last week's presentation. Then I'm going to jump in right into behavior and data collection, describe some individual and group interventions that have some good evidence behind them, and then also discuss where do we even start? How do we find evidence-based interventions, and where does this information come from? So last week's presentation, we talked a lot about having an environment that's engaging and reinforcing. Again, there's going to be times where we critique kids, we point out some negative things, but if we're creating an environment that is overall at the global level, really supportive and caring and loving, and we're having fun with the kids and they feel the love there, you're gonna have a better, majority of the time, there's gonna be better outcomes. So you're consistently praising, you're building that rapport, and then you're teaching a lot of these social emotional skills. So these pictures on the right here are some of my times at a behavioral camp. All of the kids in this program had ADHD and other externalizing behaviors in Miami, Florida. And so again, having a classroom with kids who at times will destroy things or be physically aggressive, we always reset and try to make sure that environment was super supportive for everyone. So when we think about behaviors, we're scientists. We look at behaviors as we want to know exactly what's going on. So almost like you're a sportscaster or you're filming, you want to see the observable state. You never really want to discuss feelings, only because those are subjective. So they're perceptions about what we think somebody else is feeling. And when they're objective, they're measurable. So we get a quantity or even a understanding of, we can quantify some of our perceptions as well, and we'll discuss that. The environment matters. So we really have to look at all of those factors because again, children are really reactive to their environments. And just like I discussed, having a supportive environment is going to help. If we have an environment that isn't set up and conducive to supporting a lot of students, that will definitely play a factor into some behaviors. So again, mistaken behaviors, that's the way I like to think about that. They're learned. So we really do try to teach kids more pro-social ways of interacting or getting their needs met. So let's practice here. Let's stop here and look at these problems or mistaken behaviors. So Joseph is making other students mad in class. Joseph can't focus. Joseph is defiant. So when you read these, you understand Joseph is having a lot of trouble, but it doesn't really give us a good picture of what's going on, how frequently is it occurring, what's that duration look like. So think about how can you state these in a way that's going to allow another person to say, oh, that's exactly what this behavior is. Okay, because somebody might interpret defiant or focus in different ways than you interpret it. Okay, so we really want to be precise. And one way to do that here, as you can see on the right, is you're gathering more precise information. So you can say Joseph is verbally teasing other students 30 times per day. So we know exactly how many times it's occurring. That's pretty frequent, right? Joseph's eye contact is on his paper less than 10 seconds per day. So we know his eye contact is everywhere else but the paper. So you're being very specific about what's happening. Joseph follows teacher directions 1 out of 10 times each day. So we know that's an area that Joseph is really struggling. So you're getting a little bit more nuanced in how you're describing behaviors. So when we look at the behaviors, we want to think about what's causing these, right? What's the function of the behavior? And so the behavior specialists in the room and individuals who work in special education really know that, again, that's what we're trying to figure out, right? We want to know the underlying cause. So what is it that the student is getting from that behavior? What's that consequence? Or what are they avoiding through that behavior? They might be escaping from something. So all behavior is communication. Anything that a child does or says, that's communication. Anything we do, it's communication. So 2 methods. So we can informally behavior tracking or observations, and then a functional behavior assessment are going to be 2 ways that we can look at that behaviors and understand causes. So this presentation really isn't going to jump into specifically how to do a functional behavior assessment. Those are typically done by the school psychologists, a behavior specialist. And so what I want to show you is give you some introduction to some of the terms that are going to be used, or even kind of a general knowledge of what they might be looking for and how to work with functional behavior assessment and behavior plans that come out of that. So anytime you're doing something like this, it's always best practice to inform the parents and work with the parents. Specifically with the FBA, that requires the parents' permission, especially, you know, done under an IEP, for example, individualized education plan. And you definitely want to always check with your district guidelines and see if you're working within the district's guidelines too. So general considerations about this. So all of this, when we're looking at behaviors, it's again, a systematic process. We really want to see, again, what's making it stay up so high? What are those underlying causes? Because then once we have that information, we can understand how to kind of combat that or replace some of those behaviors. But we got to have something to really, a base to understand that. And again, if we think just perceptions and throw out a bunch of haphazard, maybe hypotheses about what's going on, it really doesn't generalize across settings. So another professional might pick this up, and if you just wrote Joseph's Defiant, try to praise him a lot. It's not a very prescribed, it's not going to help other professionals who pick up that piece of paper or other people who work with him, with that student, for example. So all of this, we're really following a general progression that's similar to the scientific method. So we want to describe and understand the behaviors. We want to collect the data. We have to have the data there. The data is so important to have. We want to hypothesize about what's causing the function of the behavior, what's keeping the behavior maintained. And then we're going to analyze that data and information as a team and really think through, because when we implement the interventions, we can start to see if things are going down, then great, things are moving in the right direction, that aggressive behavior is moving on a downward trend. However, if not, we might need to modify the intervention a little bit, and we're going to discuss a little bit of that as well today. So how do we start this process? Again, we have to have that data. This is the big premise of what we're talking about today. And many of you have seen this before, the ABCs of behavior, but for those of you who have not, we're thinking of behaviors as anything that's observable, correct? And then we look at the antecedent there. So what is happening right before that behavior? So we're trying to think, okay, what's the thing that triggered the behavior? You know, where's that connection to the behavior? And then the consequence is something that was the outcome. You know, what happened? You know, did the teacher immediately focus on that behavior, or did the teacher ignore it? Did the teacher send the student out to the principal's office? Those are consequences, things that happen as a result of the behavior. So all of this, we really want to tell a story. With the ABCs, we're gathering that data, we're getting a complete picture of what is going on, and we're trying to identify patterns and trying to see a sequence. And so what you start to do is you can create multiple kind of storylines about what's going on with this behavior. And that's going to help us really identify ways to best intervene and help create a better system for a child. Now, we're all human, right? Again, that we aren't robots where we function as a behavior and we do something and we get praised. It's not that simple. So things that happen prior to school, things that occur in our daily lives, we have to understand those things too. So those are, every time we're tracking behaviors, we always want to think of a setting event. So was there, for example, that morning, the kiddo came in really tired and was always falling asleep. And then later on in the afternoon, we see a spike in aggression. So one of the setting events is, we know when we really were exhausted, sometimes that lowers our frustration tolerance. So for me on the right, so when I don't get enough sleep or not having some coffee sometimes, I start to feel a little bit like I need to recharge. And so then my frustration tolerance, I need to maybe step back and take some more deep breaths. So setting events are going to be really important for when you analyze any types of behaviors. So if you aren't already including these, please do. Again, it gives us a better picture of what's going on in the student's life. Now, the functions of behaviors. These are often described in an acronym that I really like, and it's called SEAT. So we take the first letter of each of these, which would be sensory, escape, attention, and access or tangibles. So that would spell out SEAT. And I know they're not set up that way, but I like this chart a lot because what I think it does is it shows the description and then kind of where to plug that in into the ABC chart, which we'll review right now. But primarily, if we think about that consequence or what's going on with that behavior, there's 4 areas that we could try to hypothesize from. And we can say that the kid is doing that behavior for attention, sensory, so seeking out stimulation from the environment, escape. I think adults, we do this a lot too. So if we have to write a report, we might escape to a television show and then have to work on the report later. Kids do this as well with maybe doing a behavior and then they get sent out of a room. So they've escaped essentially from that assignment. And then tangibles. So a lot of kids at the grocery store, we've seen plenty of those tantrums where kids really want something and then it's making that behavior of a tantrum really increase. So when we document this and we have our ABC chart, so you can have the date and time. So that's the one big piece. Always get in the habit of putting your date and time, and so you can remember to start building a pattern of when are things occurring. And then again, you have a column for your setting events, your antecedent, behavior, and consequence. So you're having a logical progression of what's happening. So in the first one here on August 7th, even if you put an unknown, that's better than just leaving it blank. So at that time, there wasn't really anything available. Antecedent, so John's playing trucks, told to line up for the bathroom. Okay, so giving us some more setting events plus the antecedent. The behavior is he ran away, laid on the ground, screaming, trying to kick at shelves. The consequence told him to stand up and send all the kids to the bathroom and waited him out. So that teacher there is waiting for that behavior to subside rather than maybe criticizing John's behavior or immediately telling John to go turn a red card or something. So again, those are some consequences. So we would see later on whether that was really reinforcing that behavior or is the behavior going to start to decrease. Okay. So again, when we're building this story and we're talking through this, I like this chart a lot. They found this through Indiana University. And the antecedent here is parent asked Joe to stop playing on the computer. The behavior, screaming, no. The consequence is their parent tells Joe to leave the computer again. So then the next antecedent. So I like this way. It's a little bit more structured in a sense. You can start to see each behavior versus the other one was multiple behaviors, right? So if you get a better progression of what's going on. So parent then tells Joe to leave the computer and then Joe again refuses to leave. So you can start to see it's a progression. It's a cyclical progression here. And that's really helpful to see so we can start to figure out what's going on. Once you have that, you can start to place a consequence there in that section and start to think about what's really causing it. There might be multiple functions there. And so that would really play into the types of interventions that we do. Now, all of this, again, you have the ABCs, that setting events here in this progression. So we can see what would the desired behavior be on the very top there. And that would be great if a kiddo did that. But it would also be great. It would also be okay if a kid has an acceptable alternative. So we can teach something that isn't probably not the most desired behavior, but they have an alternative, something alternative that they can still, they're not destroying anything, they're not hurting anyone. It's a little bit more pro-social. It's still going to maintain that consequence in that moment, but it's not going to be the physical aggression, for example, here. So you can see in this setting event, there's some peer conflict. The trigger or the antecedent there is that teacher peer request, so asking them to separate. So then ideally the kid would comply with the request here on top, and then that would be the end of it. So request completed. However, another way the student could do this is they'd walk away. And so it'd be avoiding the requests from that teacher, but it's still a little bit of more of an acceptable way to approach that. So again, there's ways that we want to think about these behaviors and then understand there's other types of acceptable behaviors that children can do and might not always comply with that initial request. So all of that I discussed, again, you're capturing data, you're thinking through a progression of what's happening. Additional data methods, and these are super powerful ways to collect information, is we want to look at the number of occurrences through frequency tracking. And we're looking at events. As you saw earlier, I think I said Joseph has 30 instances of, I think it was teasing or not paying attention. I can't remember exactly. But again, you're giving the counts of how many times these things are happening. Then a partial interval recording would be that you're at least tracking it. It happened at least once during the interval. So you start to get a little snapshot of that behavior. And then a whole interval would be a certain amount of time. So intervals just refer to time segments, and that at least occurred once, or it has to occur throughout the entire interval that you're saying. Then the length of time would be looking at latency recording and duration. So latency is, say I give you a request, I say, please put down your phone. Please put down your phone. And then we want to see from the end of that command, how long did it take before you complied with the request, okay? Duration is exactly how it sounds. We want to see it, the chunk of time that the behavior is occurring, okay? Because a tantrum that occurred over 50 minutes is really significant, right? So we need to have that information of the duration, because if we just say the kid had a tantrum one time per week, yeah, but it was a tantrum that lasted 50 minutes. So each of these types can give us different information. So as you see here on a frequency chart, and all of these are going to be in the Google Drive that we share with you. And some of you may have your own that you use. But again, remember you're tracking the date, the time, and you could even put in some notes on the back about some of the setting events that you see during the specific recording. And then you're simply going to tally how many times this behavior occurs. And then at the bottom, you're going to put whether it was in minutes, hours, or even throughout the day. And then that gives you an ability to say, for example, here, Joseph ran to the door 10 times in 10 minutes. So then in that observation here, we can say Joseph ran to the door at a rate. So it gives us some rate information about 1 time per minute. So we're able to have a way to calculate some of these behaviors, have that data here. So other people see this, they know that we're gonna have to be proactive and really watching for Joseph. If that's a dangerous behavior, he's running toward the door because he could potentially leave. The other one that we can do here, the other type of behaviors, it's the event recording, I'm sorry, but I wanted to show you in a different way of how that looks. So you can see that there's the appropriate comments column, and then there's an inappropriate column here. And that could have all of the information up there for some setting events, or what are we looking at? So in this example, Howard made 4 appropriate comments across 5 periods. So you can average that. You're simply taking 4 over 5, so 0.8 per period, and that's less than 1 per period. So we know that's not a lot. But when you look at his inappropriate comments, the 7.8 per period, which is quite a bit. So that's a lot going on there. So we start building a better picture of what's going on. Then with partial and whole interval recording, again, you're just taking small segments of time. And then for partial, if the behavior occurred when you're looking at the behavior within a 30-second segment, at least once, then you would mark it. And if it doesn't, you don't mark it. So in this instance, they're using check marks to see if it occurred, and then O's would be it didn't occur. The zeros would be it didn't occur. And then the whole interval, it simply has to be there for the entire 30 seconds. So again, if you start to get all of these are 30-second intervals, and they're occurring, you may want to move back to frequency accounts because it's happening so frequently. Or in another way is looking at it duration, because then you're getting a better chunk of time. So these really just give you a behavioral snapshot. They're quick and easy to do. You can do over 10 minutes or 15 minutes and gather quite a bit of data with these. Latency, like I discussed earlier, so you're getting an understanding of compliance time. So you're looking at when Howard here in this example was instructed to begin working. And then how long did it take Howard to really start that behavior? Again, that's super important for instruction, correct? I mean, if we think about if a kid takes 10 minutes to start that task, they might have forgot a lot of information that they were, told within the instructions. So we really have to think about having some shorter latency times here for kiddos. And this is probably a way to think about, if we're looking at following directions, how quickly kiddos we want to shorten up that time that they're following the directions. So this is one way to track that. The other area is duration, as I discussed before. So again, you're going to see how long the behaviors are occurring. And so you can have, a start column, end column, and then you put the duration there by simply, if you have a stopwatch, just put that information in there. If you're using a clock, 8:30, then it went to 8:37. So you're tracking how long is it occurring. And then I really suggest that you look at this resource from Vanderbilt University, and they give you a lot of different ways. A lot of these forms are from them that I put in the Google Drive. And I thought they were some of the best that I have seen in doing this work. One thing I use pretty frequently in my role as a school psychologist is something called the MBST tracking app. And I find this app is very, very useful because it provides you with graphs of all of those tracking. It incorporates those different tracking methods we just reviewed, but it's going to graph it for you automatically. It will color code the data for you, and it can send it to you. You can send it through your phone, and it's pretty simple to use. And I tend to set this up using the methodology of the behavioral observations of students in schools, which is an evidence-based system for working or for observing children with ADHD and other externalizing behaviors. Because in that way of tracking, you're looking at on-task behaviors and then off-task behaviors that are verbal off-task behaviors, motor off-task behaviors, or or maybe movement. So they're moving out of that area. So again, it's just a nice way to capture that data of on and off task. When you're looking at all of these, I highly recommend that you pull data from other kiddos, or you're comparing that kiddo that you're looking at to other kiddos during your observation to another student. Because what you start to see is it really different than other students in the class? Because what if you're looking at one student's behavior and you see that there's a lot of out of seat behaviors, a lot more inappropriate vocalizations. Well, if you look at other kiddos that are similar to that student and they're doing it, it actually might just be something in the environment that you really need to think about. How can I set up my schedule? How can I keep things going at a more fast pace? Because again, when working with kids with ADHD, you have to keep things moving. If you have any kind of delay time, kids will just pull into that, and then it escalates, right? It becomes a snowball effect. So please take a look at the MBST, and that's available through your iPhone. I believe Google has this as well, so through the Play Store. So I also like this because Brian Dunphy here, the creator, if you have any issues with it, he'll email you back very quickly. So he's a great person to reach out to for that. So here's a final chart thinking of those different measurement levels. And I really thought this was a nice visual. So when you're working with other aides or other teachers and you want them to track some information, this might be a nice visual for them to see. We want number of occurrences. And so we can see when would we use that if it's an event recording, or if it's difficult to count each instance, you might do that interval recording. So you're breaking it up into smaller pieces. So you can start to see, collect smaller chunks of information to collect that snapshot of what's going on. And then you're looking at length of time. So you can see the duration and the latency there. So this is a nice chart. I thought that was really helpful. So please, use this. This was also provided by Vanderbilt University. This isn't all we do when we're looking at behavior. There's other data that we need to collect. So oftentimes we have rating scales. So some of you have seen the functional assessment screening tool. So you're going to gather information about the other things that might be impacting the behavior. Okay, so as a typical teenager, verbal comments might they might say inappropriate comments, and then a lot of times they're trying to get reinforcement or attention from their peers. So again, you really want a lot of that information here, and this is a nice tool to use. Another thing is when we start to think about we're going to start putting in some reinforcements or interventions, having some of the preferential information from students and working with them to say like, hey, what are some things you like? Or even if they're a little bit older kid and they're able to think through some of these things, like, hey, what's going on? What's happening with these behaviors? And some of these tools here can help structure that for you. So I put all these forms in the Google Drive resource folder for you. So general notes on behavioral tracking. So we're keeping the data. You're scientists, right? So you have to go back to the data, review it, and practice doing it. It doesn't get easier if you don't practice it, okay? So you have to practice it. So using all of that information, other things, you're using narrative observation data. So you might write it, just kind of what's going on in the environment. So you're just writing those out. And then you might collect some other data. So you're kind of pulling in some of those written out notes with some of those frequency counts, some of the other data that you're collecting through those other means. And those peer comparisons are critical, right? So it really ensures that it's not the environment, it's not our teaching style that's really affecting the kiddos. We got to give them a fair shot. Okay, so we really have to look at, is it significant or is it different than other kids in the environment? And we have to have the data to back that up. So we have to make a list too of the behaviors to be prioritized. We can't address every single behavior, nor is it best practice to go through and try to change every single behavior or even look at every behavior. So try to be strategic and working with that. And then looking at those setting events are really important for us. We're all humans. We don't develop within a vacuum. All right, so now I just want to switch to briefly schedules of reinforcement. So when we're thinking of the behavior that's going on, and we've talked about reinforcement before in the part 2 of this presentation. When we think of reinforcement and we're adding something or taking away to increase a behavior, we can do that either continuously, or we can do it for all responses, or maybe for some responses and not all of the responses. So then when we get into that partial interval schedule, some of the ways we can break that down and think about these examples here is the fixed interval schedule. And I like this chart because it provides examples that we can think about. So, each 2 weeks, we're getting a paycheck. So this might be every week, we make sure to praise the kid this many times, or every day we're praising this amount of times. It's fixed, it's the same amount every single time. Variable interval would be, it's going to be a varying amount of time passes. So again, checking your email, it doesn't happen every 10 minutes, it doesn't happen every 30 minutes, or winning a video game, it depends on a certain amount of levels that are passed. And it depends by person, right? Then a ratio schedule is going to be more of after a certain amount. So you're doing a little bit more math here. You're doing some division, and a reinforcement occurs after a fixed number of responses. So you would get one free meal after your 10th purchase, right? So that 10th one out of 10 there, you're getting that free meal. Variable ratio, this has also been known as the slot machine reinforcement method, right? Because you don't know when it's going to happen. It's based on this kind of random formula that it's, when you're playing the lottery, the number of shots to score a goal in a soccer game, it's not very easy to predict. And so the next chart here gives some really good examples. And I know we can't go into this. We don't have the time to go into it a lot today. This could be a whole entire presentation, but I really want this chart here in the presentation so you can refer back to it. And it's also in our Google Drive. But in that first column, you get a different example that's in the classroom. So for that fixed ratio, it says you're going to, every time the learner raises his hand, you're going to call on the kiddo every third time. So again, it's going to build a high response rate. And then it gives you in the last column, what might be some of the negatives or the cons of that, okay? This is going to be helpful when you think about behaviors and how in the interventions that we use. Because when we think about reinforcement and trying to look at the progression of behaviors, oftentimes we think about, we want to reinforce a different behavior. So the differential reinforcement of other behavior, we're replacing that behavior that is not so desired. So for this student, he's going to receive, in this first row, the student receives a star for each interval he refrains, might be a period, he refrains from talking with his neighbor. So we're trying to eliminate that behavior talking. And why those schedules of reinforcements are pretty important is because if you have a behavior that occurs and you have the data to say, it happens once every month, you probably wouldn't need to continuously reinforce that opposite behavior. So if a kid maybe spoke out of turn, let's say once a week, you may not have to praise that opposite behavior of when he raises his hand so frequently. And so that's the way to connect those two. Again, you got to have those competing behaviors that are really going to affect how we respond to them. So our frequency and how we respond to those behaviors is really dependent on that data. So that's why the data is really helpful for us. And then another one that I want to point out here on this chart is differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. So you're going to reinforce the student when he or she engages in an identified behavior which is incompatible with the target behavior. So an example of that is student receives a sticker for each interval. He's on task versus daydreaming at his desk. So again, has that flavor of we're really trying to replace those behaviors. We really want to increase their ability to use that pro-social behavior. All right, so now we're going to move to another area, and this is something that I really like to talk about when I work with teachers, and I do a lot of consultation work around this. So individual and group interventions. One way is we want kids to start tuning into those behaviors that they're doing. And when we've set this up and we're talking about the kids, we want them to sit in their chair a little bit more frequently. We want them to raise their hand. So when we're working with kids and we work with teachers to help track this data with kiddos, these charts can be really helpful and fun. For an older kid, they might look a little different, but these are some ways to structure that for kiddos. And so each time they do this, they would either color it in or circle it. And some of you might have some really good examples of that. The one on the right, I think is fantastic because it also sets up times in between that very end, more times for them to be reinforced or rewarded for their behaviors. So that one is a good one for kiddos. It keeps them more engaged, and I think can be very helpful for kids, especially younger. A lot of you know about behavioral tracking systems that you can use for kiddos in the classroom setting. One thing I like and very inexpensive to do, you can do it with foil or even the marbles, is if you start to see, you catch the moment where the class is completely quiet, if you're kind of working on that, and you can say, oh, the class is really quiet right now. I'm putting a marble here in our jar, or a piece of wrapped up gold foil. Kids love that. I'm going to put that in here, and then you can start to see there's different levels of prizes that the kids will, or the class will receive. Another one is Class Dojo. A lot of teachers have used before, and that you can have the points set up and communicate to the families so they're seeing that. So those are really good to keep track of all of this, right? That's data that you're keeping track of really hopefully creating a better reinforcing environment, which will overall decrease any types of behaviors. And then another is that good behavior game. You're focused. You make a game out of it, so the kids really buy into that. So there's a link down there for that, and really give that a shot too. Even in your intervention groups, you can even create a game out of that. So within that 20 minutes intervention for maybe speech or behavior, we're just saying, if everyone can maintain this, we're going to put we're going to have a little dance party really with the last minute of our session. So it's really rewarding for kiddos to see that. Behavior cards, many of you have seen this system. I actually had this when I was growing up as a kid in class. The thing about this system, in the Class Dojo, any other group systems, please make sure you're looking at kids who are consistently on yellow or red. Really try to seek out opportunities that they can try to make up for that, or really think about that. Is that system really working for that kiddo? And don't make this your only behavior management system, right? Because the kids might become fixated on it. It becomes that's the only way they're going to want to do a behavior. So trying to think about that and be cautious of this. Okay, so work with your behaviorist. Really think through, how is the system working for everybody? Is it equitable for all children? Also, another good method that I think is probably one of the best things to do if you're going to implement a card system is resetting maybe every 2 hours or between certain transitions, because it allows kids to come back to green. It really builds up that motivation and saying, whoa, I get another shot. And remember, their brains are growing. They're not fully developed yet. So you want to help them learn that I can try again, that this isn't the end of the world, right? So we really want them to have those opportunities, because to stay on red the whole day, that might be really discouraging for a kid, and they probably wouldn't want to work as hard the next time. Another way, again, we want to have children tune into the behaviors is we can think of behavior charts. And so you could start tracking these for kiddos and even reviewing these at the end of the day, because what you can do is have a daily report card that's also sent home with the kid, and they're getting reinforced at home, or a prize, and they're earning something. And it's a real nice way to show I did awesome at school, so I get some special time with mommy and daddy. I also get maybe a small pastry. One thing I always recommend to parents when doing this is the prizes should never be super expensive, ever. A kid would not earn a video game for their daily reward or something like that. So be cautious of that. And down at the bottom, you can have this on the back of those daily report cards, kind of thinking if they earned 9 to 10 stars or 9 to 10 happy faces, whatever system you have, they would earn a green. Then they have a yellow day. So remember, we kind of have bad days sometimes. So it wouldn't be a fully green day. So they get something, but not a lot of it. And then a red day, they might have some reflection time that they also maybe have to work on some chores or extra activities. This chart I came across when organizing the resources, and this is through the Southeast Consortium, SALPA, and it's an Appendix D in our resources. And I really like this because it pulls across all of the information we've already talked about with the functions of the behaviors. But then it gives you that replacement behavior down there. And it really charts that out for you and helps guide you to be able to say, all right, this is happening. Let's figure out, we already kind of thought about it. Now let's try these couple things. Because again, the goal is we're teaching better ways, pro-social ways of really getting their needs or wants met. Another way, and individual or teachers might work with kids, is behavior contracts. And we work with the team, with the teacher, the parent. And the biggest thing is, if the kid is able to really think through this behavior contract. So they're setting themselves up, they're agreeing to this. And I know a lot of times kids who are diagnosed with emotional disturbance or labeled emotional disturbance or diagnosed with ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, this is going to be a little bit harder. So maybe you're going to start off slow, work on some behaviors that are already good for them, that they're already doing pretty well, but get them in the habit of thinking, holding themselves accountable, because that's going to be so important for them and moving forward and making some changes. A few other resources I really like are these individual and group social stories. So when you have some social stories, you can make them really awesome with pictures or have them draw, and then talk through this. And it's a nice way to review and really practice these so that they're learning better ways to express their needs and wants. Other times, these books are really helpful ways of working with kids, especially younger kids, to say like, hey, this is a story that we can refer to, and we can try to practice and get better with that. I really like these sets of resources, and I'm sure if you have any other resources, please feel free to share those with me for social stories, because people get really creative with these. Then these visual cues, right? Remember I talked about in presentation in part 2, visuals are very important for all of us. So if you have these visuals, you're going to be, weight cards, stop and think, and even voice volume. It's going to be helpful ways to redirect that behavior and to really kind of replace or help kids manage those behaviors on their own, or even in a group setting. Okay. When you put all of this together, most of you have seen a behavior intervention plan. A lot of times I hear behavior intervention plans are often more work for us as adults than they are in really doing what they do. But what I think, again, is you have to have a way to hold yourself accountable and hold the team accountable for what are we doing. We collected all this data, we kind of figured out the functions, we're going to start to put in some of these interventions. Now we have to have a way to track that and keep working as a plan. So sometimes it might just be a little bit of formatting in how you put these in, or if you find a behavior intervention plan that you really like, I would definitely stick with it and share it with others. Because again, reviewing and going back to it is going to be the way that we can continue working in a better fashion. And then once kids actually, make some gains and they progress, and they always, have a nice little ceremony. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but you can give them a certificate. They met their goals on their behavior intervention plan. Keep working hard. There might be still more work to do, but that they met their goals. So dynamite, right? So there's other really cute certificates that I uploaded as well. So please really do that for kiddos. It's so nice that they remember that in the long run. Okay, so some important notes about all of this. Behavior is, they're learning this, right? Kids sometimes come to us with learned behaviors over a couple years. So you're gonna have to scaffold it, meaning you can't make it so difficult for them with the goals. And most of you are familiar with SMART goals, right? So we really wanna make it realistic. It's gonna be slow. It might take kids a lot longer to really unlearn and learn those new behaviors that we're teaching. And being accountable, right? So on the right here is a way to see how are you implementing it. So again, thinking about, there's a checklist for your implementation plan. I mean, there's no other way. We can't really think about it. Yeah, they did it or not. We have to have the data. It's going to hold us accountable, make us better. And if you you maybe forget one of the lines and you try again to go back to it the next day and do better with it. That's all we can do is get better with this, because we owe it to the kids and what they maybe are coming in with, right? So we have to work toward that. What I like too is thinking about it in this different way of behaviors and tracking it with the graph. So you might have collected some of that behavior and then you implemented the intervention, which is this line. And what you can see is when you started implementing praise, those frequencies of disruption here started to go down. And that's kind of what we want to see, is when we've thought through what are the functions, what are we addressing. So praise for this kid was super powerful. Okay. Now, when we think through some evidence-based resources, some good places to start is start local. You know, your SELPAs, a lot of the information I got here were from SELPAs here in California, which are local agencies that work with kids with disabilities within our districts. You know, our professional organizations, American Psychological Association, ASHA, for the speech language pathologist, different professional organizations are really helpful. Two websites I want to make sure you leave here with is the What Works Clearinghouse and the Intervention Central website are going to be your database for all the interventions that have been backed by research, and then they tell you which ones are going to be more effective versus the ones that are not as effective. Because anything you use, you want to make sure it has a good evidence base behind it, because you're just going to get more bang for your buck for more kids. Okay, that's that idea that you're getting a more bang for your buck for more kids. So it's going to work for more kiddos. Sometimes that Google search, I've done this quite frequently. Just be careful, just look at the resources. Is it coming from a university that's credible? You know, think through it, use your skills there as professionals. And then in the Google Drive that I've compiled for these presentations, a lot of those resources are going to be in there. And then feel free to share some resources with us too, because I always like having more tools for my bag of my toolbox. And then this comes here from the Vanderbilt website as well. So as you're practicing this, there's some good scenarios that you can practice, and it really teaches you how to get better at this, because the only way we can get better at all of these things and using these resources is just to practice. And I'm still working on it too. I've been doing this for about 8 years, you know, specifically for behaviors. And I keep having to practice and go back to what I'm doing and evaluate. Some other great books, kind of my philosophy and how I work with kids. The Defiant Child by Barkley, Explosive Child by Ross Green, The Deepest Well, which really talks about trauma and those effects, because a lot of times kids with trauma get diagnosed so many times with ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder. And a lot of times it's because of the traumatic background that they had no control over. Whole Brain Child really talks a lot about brain functioning and working with kids and thinking about those different systems, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in part 4 in the last section. One book down here at the bottom, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk, is one of my favorites. Like, I love using this. There's so many good examples, and it's like a comic book style, and so many parents really appreciate it. The Incredible Teachers, I used a lot of this from part 1 and part 2, these resources in the presentation. So really look at these. Last 2 are by Peg Dawson, Executive Skills in Children and Adolescents. Our executive functioning skills, so our ability to attend and shift and inhibit responses, are really things that we have to pay attention to as educators and professionals working with kids. So if you don't know a lot about those, go to some of this resource here by Peg Dawson and take a little dive into that. And feel free to email me if you have any questions. Then Ungifted by Scott Barry Kaufman is also another fantastic resource in thinking of how we really understand disabilities or you know, intelligence. So other ways we look at a problem in our field. And so for our Halloween theme coming up next week, everyone should be dressed up. Is that Kim? everybody should be dressed up next week, right?
Oh, that would be lovely. People, no one's going to use their cameras, but hey, we can try.
So that's it for today. There's a lot of information, but I really hope that everyone had, learned a little bit of here today and can take it forward and using it in their practice. Kim, do you mind if I show the Google Drive very quick?
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, please do.
So let me pull that up. And then we'll take a look at some questions here in the chat. So when you go to the Google Drive and then Kim will add you to this, you can see I broke this up into part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. And then when you click into, for example, part 1, you'll have access to the slides that are going to be here and also the resources. And I will go back and make sure to rename a lot of them to make them more user-friendly and maybe even create some subfolders. But overall, all that information is going to be there. And then as I was compiling a lot of this information, I did my best to always put in the resource list. So all the things that I've discussed are going to be here on this list. So some of these other resources that you can find more tools, downloadable things. Because in my mind, a lot of this stuff is already out there, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just want to maybe have to modify for what we're doing. So let me take a look and see if we had any questions. I'm going to stop sharing here. Okay, so I think, oh yeah, Brian, that is me in the last picture from one of the events that we did for the kids in Miami. That I worked at it was a summer camp for kids with behavioral problems, ADHD, and externalizing ODD behaviors. So yeah, that was me. Anyone else have any questions regarding any of these resources? Anyone want to comment on some things that they're doing? We'd love to hear that. You can go ahead and put it in the chat. We have about a few more minutes here. And that's okay too. Feel free to send me an email. I'm going to put my email in here right now too, so you can do that. I thank everybody for your time today. And I want this to be a learning experience. And next week, what we're going to talk about is some timeout practice. What does that look like? And we're also going to discuss when kids escalate. And in my practice, I've unfortunately had to put kids into physical restraints within my team. And how do we work to prevent that? Okay, so we're going to discuss that next week and dive into that a little bit more. So thank you everybody for your time. I am putting in my email into the chat, so feel free to reach out to me at any time. All right. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.